In the deep silence before dawn, when the world still felt half asleep, a man named Aran walked alone through the edge of his village, unaware that his life was about to be torn apart. Aran was not a warrior, nor a man of status. He was a woodcarver, known for shaping masks that carried the stories of his ancestors. His life was humble, predictable, rooted in the soil where generations of his family had lived and died. But that morning, the air felt wrong. The birds were silent, the wind was still, and even the trees seemed to hold their breath. Aran never saw the raiders approach. A sharp crack behind him, a flash of movement, the burn of a rope tightening around his wrists. He tried to breathe, but a cloth covered his face, stealing the air from his lungs. He fought, twisting, kicking, desperate, but his strength was no match for the men who had come to steal lives. His knife fell from his hand and disappeared into the dirt. He was dragged like an animal, his feet scraping the earth, his cries swallowed by the forest. When the cloth was finally pulled from his face, he was thrown into a pit with dozens of others, men, women, children, faces he did not recognize. Their fear had no language, yet he understood every trembling breath. Some prayed, some screamed, others were silent, already defeated. Aran was not a man of violence, but he felt a fire rise inside him, a fire born of confusion and betrayal. He demanded to know why he had been taken, who these men were, where they were taking him. Nobody answered. The raiders moved with cold efficiency. Those who resisted were beaten. Those who begged were ignored. Those who tried to flee were cut down where they stood. By nightfall, the captives were forced to march toward the coast. Aran's wrists bled from the ropes, his ankles burned. He watched people collapse from exhaustion, only to be whipped back to their feet. The world he knew faded behind him, his home, his tools, his dreams, all swallowed by the darkness. Days later, when they reached the port, Aran saw something he had never imagined in all his life, a massive wooden ship, towering like a beast carved from nightmares. The men who guarded them called it a trader's vessel. But Aran knew, deep in his bones, that this ship was built not for travel, but for suffering. When he refused to walk forward, a blow to the back of his neck dropped him to the ground. Blood filled his mouth. His vision blurred. He heard only one sentence before he was dragged up the ramp and thrown into darkness. "You belong to us now." Aran's world ended as the hatch slammed shut above him, sealing him inside the belly of the slave ship. Darkness closed around Aran like a fist. The air beneath the deck was thick, wet, and so heavy that every breath tasted like rot. The moment he hit the wooden floor, bodies shifted around him, dozens of men packed so tightly that their shoulders touched even when they tried to turn away. Aran pushed up on trembling arms. The ceiling was so low he could not sit fully upright. He could barely see. Only slivers of weak light slipped through the cracks between the planks above. The stench was unbearable. Sweat, blood, vomit, fear. It clung to everything. Iron shackles clamped around Aran's ankles before he even understood what was happening. The cold metal bit into his skin. Chains rattled, connecting him to the men on either side of him, strangers who were now forced to share the same breath, the same misery, the same despair. Hours passed like days. The ship creaked and groaned as the waves struck its sides. Each movement forced the captives to sway together like a single organism made of broken people. Some cried out for their families, others begged for death. A few simply stared into nothingness, already lost to their minds. Aran tried to stay conscious, to understand, to make sense of the nightmare. But the air was too thin, too foul. Every inhale seared his lungs. His vision flickered in and out. Above them, boots stomped across the deck. Voices barked orders in a language he did not understand. The ship lurched, and suddenly the world moved. Aran gripped the wood beneath him as his stomach twisted. He had never been on a boat before. Then came the screaming. Not from the captives, this time from outside, from the sea. The slaves pressed their bodies against the boards as if trying to sense what was happening beyond their prison. But nothing changed, except the fear. Hours later, a hatch opened. Blinding light poured in. The guards ordered them onto the deck, dragging those too weak to stand. Aaron squinted, the sun stabbing into his eyes. It was the first time he saw the ocean stretching endlessly in every direction. No land, no hope, no escape. On deck, the guards forced them to move, slow steps, half crawling, half walking, to prevent their muscles from dying. Anyone who refused, anyone who faltered, was whipped. The lash cut deep. Aaron watched a boy collapse after the second strike, too young to understand why this was happening. Blood pooled beneath him. A guard kicked him aside as if he were no more than cargo. Some of the captives tried to starve themselves, believing death was the only freedom left. Aaron understood the temptation, but the guards had a weapon for that too. They carried long iron devices, tube-like instruments that forced the mouth open. If someone refused to eat, they drove the device down the throat and poured hot, thick gruel until the victim choked on it. Aaron saw it once. Only once. That was enough. Back below deck, the misery grew. Heat thickened the air until it felt like fire burning without flames. Sweat dripped from the ceiling like rain. Sickness spread faster than the ship could sail. Men coughed until blood stained their lips. Others shook with fever. Many would never stand again. And yet, the worst pain was not physical. It was the silence of those who had accepted their fate. One night, during a violent storm, the ship rocked so violently that the chains rattled like bones. Waves slammed against the hull. Thunder roared overhead. The captives were thrown against one another, unable to break their bonds. Aaron's heart pounded, but part of him felt a single forbidden thought. If the ship sinks, I will be free. Lightning lit up the cracks in the boards. The sea howled. The world shook. But the ship did not break. When the storm finally passed, Aaron realized something horrifying. He was starting to forget what freedom even felt like, and that terrified him more than death. Days blurred into nights, and nights blurred into something even darker. Aaron no longer knew how long he had been trapped inside the belly of the ship. Time had lost meaning. His body grew thinner, weaker, but his mind refused to disappear into the same numbness that consumed the others. Something inside him was still alive. Anger, memory, maybe the faint echo of the man he used to be. One evening, as the sun fell and the air turned colder, Aaron heard commotion on deck. Not the usual shouting, not the familiar rhythm of violence. This noise was different, frantic, sharp, and laced with fear. The guards were fighting. Aaron strained to listen. Boots thudded across the ceiling. Metal clanged. Someone screamed. Then, suddenly, footsteps approached the hatch above them. The prisoners froze. The hatch blasted open with a crash. A body fell through. It hit the floor only a few meters from Aaron, the sound sickening and final. The man was bleeding from the chest, dressed in the uniform of the crew. He was dead before he touched the wood. Panic swept through the captives like fire through dry grass. For the first time since Aaron had been thrown into this place, the guards were no longer in control. Something was happening above them, something violent, something chaotic, something that might mean hope, or something far worse. A moment later, a second man appeared at the top of the ladder, not a guard, not a crew member, a captive. His wrists were still raw where the shackles had been. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken but burning with fury. Behind him, the muffled echoes of a rebellion shook the ship. The man shouted words Aaron could not understand, but the meaning was clear. Freedom. Fight. Now. For the first time since Aaron had been captured, he felt his heartbeat surge with something other than fear. But the rebellion was doomed. Within minutes, the screams on deck grew fewer and fewer. Heavy boots thundered down the ladder. The rebelling captive, who had opened the hatch, was struck down before he could even raise his hands. His body collapsed beside the first. A guard shouted orders in a furious rage, and the hatch slammed shut once again. The darkness returned. But something had changed. Not outside, inside Aaron. The rebellion had failed. Yes, but it had revealed something the guards never intended the captives to learn. The ship was not invincible. The guards bled. The guards feared. The guards could die. That night, Aaron could not sleep. The air felt different, charged, alive, vibrating with restless energy. For the first time, he imagined a future that was not made of chains, a future where he did not die in the belly of a ship, a future where his story did not end as cargo. He squeezed the rusted chain around his ankle. It bit into his skin. Good. Pain reminded him that he was still alive. Across the darkness, he whispered to the men chained beside him, men he did not know, men who spoke different languages, men who had nothing in common except their suffering. They listened. For the first time, Aaron saw the spark he had been waiting for reflected in another man's eyes. Hope. It did not matter if they came from different worlds. It did not matter if the ship was strong or if the guards were ruthless. It did not matter if most men believed escape was impossible. Hope was a dangerous thing, and now they all carried it. Aaron did not know when or how. It might take days, weeks, or the last fragments of his strength, but he promised himself one truth. He would not die as cargo. He would live long enough to become something the men who stole him never saw coming. A problem. Aaron closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "I am not theirs." Not anymore. Aaron woke to the sound of the ship groaning like a wounded animal. A storm had risen during the night, and the entire hull trembled under the assault of towering waves. Water seeped through the cracks in the lower deck, spreading across the filthy floor where hundreds of chained men lay in misery. He pushed himself up, the cold water numbing his skin. For days he had accepted the ship as a prison, a cage built to break the body and crush the will. But as the storm roared through the darkness, something shifted inside him. The storm created confusion on the upper decks. Men shouted orders, barrels slammed against the floor, ropes snapped under pressure. Disorder was spreading, and disorder meant possibility. Kofi, the fisherman he had met earlier in the voyage, stared at the rising water with terror. Aaron leaned closer, speaking low so only he could hear. This was the moment that would determine whether they lived or died. The storm was destroying the order that kept them chained. The storm was the first force more powerful than their captors. Lightning flashed through the cracks in the boards, revealing the panic above. A guard stumbled down the stairs, slipping on the soaked wood. He fell hard, and the ring of keys at his belt broke loose, sliding across the flooded deck. It stopped near Aaron's hand. Pain tore through his ribs when he moved, but he ignored it. He lunged. The guard tried to recover, but the rushing water made him lose balance again. Aaron's fingers closed around the keys. Kofi used what little strength he had to kick the guard back against the wall, buying Aaron the seconds he needed. His hands shook so violently he could barely fit the key into the first lock. The metal scraped against metal. Another wave shook the ship. Men cried out behind him, some praying, others simply waiting for death. Aaron forced himself to breathe and tried again. This time the lock clicked open. He freed Kofi next, then the men closest to them. They moved slowly, weak from starvation, their limbs damaged from the chains that had cut into their skin, but they moved. That alone was a quiet victory. More water poured in. The cracked hull widened under the pressure of the storm. The lower deck would not survive much longer. Aaron led the group toward the staircase. The first guard tried to block them, but he was already weakened by the chaos above. A wave struck the ship again, throwing him backward. The path opened for a single moment. Aaron seized it. They climbed to the upper deck, emerging into a world of wind and black water. The ship pitched violently from side to side. Sailors fought to secure the masts, but the storm was far stronger than their ropes. The sea swallowed the deck with every rising wave. Some of the enslaved men lost balance and fell back down the stairs. Others clung to railings or ropes torn loose from the sails. Aaron felt the entire structure shifting beneath his feet, as if the ocean itself wanted to drag the ship under. The final appears of water crashed over them, lifting several men off the deck and sending them into the sea. Aaron grabbed a broken wooden beam and held tight. Kofi held onto Aaron's arm, refusing to let go, despite the force of the water pulling him toward the deep. The mainmast snapped with a deafening crack. The ship tilted. Panic spread like fire. Aaron felt the deck collapsing beneath him. He had only seconds to choose between drowning inside the ship or letting the ocean take him. He chose the ocean. Aaron pushed himself and Kofi over the side as the ship started to break apart. The impact of the water stole his breath. The cold stabbed into his bones. He kicked upward, fighting to reach the surface. When he broke through, he gasped for air that the wind immediately tore from him. Debris from the ship floated everywhere. Aaron grabbed a piece large enough to hold his weight. Kofi clung beside him, coughing violently, but alive. In the distance, the ship groaned one last time before disappearing beneath the waves. They drifted for hours, carried by the current under a sky that slowly cleared as dawn approached. The storm died with the night, leaving behind a vast, calm sea and the broken remains of the vessel that had once imprisoned them. Aaron watched the sun rise over the horizon. The light hit the water, turning it gold. For the first time since he had been kidnapped, he felt something that did not belong to fear or pain. He felt the smallest beginning of hope. By midday, a coastal fishing boat spotted the wreckage and pulled Aaron and Kofi aboard. The crew consisted of free black fishermen who often searched the shoreline after storms. They recognized instantly what Aaron and the others had escaped from. They carried them to a remote coastal settlement where survivors of shipwrecks and runaway slaves formed small communities hidden in the jungle. Aaron spent days recovering. His back healed slowly. His ribs ached with every breath, but each morning he woke to open sky, not chains. Each night he slept on earth, not rotten wood. He worked alongside the people who took him in, learning their names, their languages, and their stories of survival. One evening, while watching the sun set over the sea, Aaron realized that he no longer saw himself as a victim. He had crossed an ocean meant to erase him. He had survived a ship designed to break him. He had faced men who believed his life held no value, but he was still here, and that alone was a form of victory. Aaron spent the first days in the hidden settlement with the same disbelief he felt when the ocean spat him back into life. His body was battered, but it was his mind that carried the heaviest wounds. Every night he woke in a panic, expecting to hear chains rattling in the dark or taste the rot of the lower deck in the back of his throat. Yet each time he opened his eyes, he found only the quiet of the forest and the soft hum of the wind through the leaves. The people who lived there called the place Kaluma. It was not a village in the ordinary sense. It was a sanctuary built by the escaped, the shipwrecked, and the forgotten. Former captives from different regions of Africa lived alongside indigenous families and free black fishermen who refused to bow to colonial powers. They shared food, tools, and stories, building a community out of lives shattered but not erased. Aaron joined them slowly, at first only observing. Every day he watched fishermen mend nets, women grind grains, elders carve wooden tools. Their movements carried no fear, no obedience, no chains. They lived with dignity, even in hiding. It was a kind of strength Aaron had never seen before, a strength not built on domination, but on survival, shared between many. Kofi recovered faster than Aaron expected. The fisherman carried deep scars on his ankles, where the shackles had eaten through his flesh, but his spirit remained unbroken. He helped Aaron walk when his ribs ached too sharply, and he introduced him to the community leaders. Through Kofi, Aaron learned the customs of Kaluma and the paths through the forest that led to fresh water, edible roots, and lookout points along the coast. Weeks passed. Aaron grew stronger. His muscles regained some of their old memory, and his breath no longer burned when he worked. Yet something inside him remained unsettled. He had survived by sheer chance. The storm, the chaos, the broken hull, none of it had been his choice. Freedom had come like a lightning strike, powerful but unpredictable. And now that he was free, he did not know what to do with the life he had regained. One evening, as the sun sank deep into the canopy and painted the forest gold, Aaron walked to the edge of a cliff that overlooked the sea. Below him, the water moved with a slow, rhythmic calm, as if it had forgotten the storm that had nearly consumed him. The sight tightened something in his chest. Escape had given him life, but the ocean had taken so many others. The cries echoing in the ship's darkness still haunted him, voices of men, women and children swallowed by chains and salt water. Aaron realized then that freedom alone was not enough. Survival was not the end of his story, it was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, he began speaking with the elders of Kaluma. They were cautious at first, but they listened. Aaron asked how many ships still passed along the coast, how many raids still occurred inland, how many people were still taken. The elders shared everything they knew. Aaron learned about patrols, safe zones and hidden paths used by both slavers and those who resisted them. He trained his body again, not with weapons or violence, but with endurance. Long walks through the forest, nights spent learning how to move silently through the undergrowth, days spent watching the ocean from different vantage points. He was no longer the man who had been bound in darkness. He was rebuilding himself, piece by piece, into someone who could guide others out of the nightmare he had escaped. By late season, Aaron had earned the trust of the settlement. He was invited to join a small group called the Horizon Keepers, men and women who watched the coastline and helped rescue those who fled or survived shipwrecks. They were not warriors in the traditional sense. They were guardians of the vulnerable, protectors of those the world considered lost. The first rescue came sooner than Aaron expected. A small canoe of indigenous hunters arrived at Kaluma with news of a capsized slave vessel miles down the coast. Survivors had been seen clinging to pieces of the hull, drifting toward a rocky inlet. Aaron's heart pounded with a familiar ache, the memory of his own desperate grip on the debris that had saved him. This time, he would not be the one drowning. He would be the one pulling others out of the water. He joined the Horizon Keepers and followed the hunters to the shore. The beach was littered with fragments of the broken ship. Farther out, dark shapes floated on the water, rising and falling with the tide. Aaron waded into the surf without hesitation. He reached the first survivor, a young man barely conscious, and carried him to dry sand. Then another, then a woman, her breath shallow but steady. Aaron worked until his shoulders burned and his legs shook. The memory of the lower deck, the chains, the suffocating air, pushed him forward with a fire he had never felt before. When the rescue ended, 9 people had been saved. Some cried silently, some lay unmoving, caught between exhaustion and shock. Aaron knelt beside them, his chest heaving, his heart pounding with a mixture of grief and triumph. He understood something then. Every life pulled from the water was a victory against the system that had tried to erase him. The ocean had once been his prison. Now, it was the place where he fought back. Aaron returned to Kaluma that night with a purpose stronger than any wound he carried. He was no longer defined by what had been taken from him. He was defined by what he chose to give, and he chose to give freedom. Aaron woke to the sound of creaking wood and distant gulls. For a moment, his body tensed as if expecting the rot, the chains, the darkness beneath the slave deck. But instead, warmth touched his skin. Sunlight, clean air, a calm sea. For the first time in months, he breathed without coughing up blood or fear. He was lying on a bunk aboard the rescue vessel, wrapped in coarse blankets that smelled of salt rather than death. 3 ribs still burned with every breath. His wrists were torn from months of iron, but he was alive, and that simple fact felt unreal. The ship's medic, An older man with steady hands and tired eyes entered the cabin. He inspected Aaron carefully, noting the scars, the malnutrition, the weeks of dehydration. He spoke little. He understood what kind of men came from those ships and how silence was a fragile shield that needed time. As the medic left, Aaron tried sitting up. His arms trembled, not from weakness alone, but from a deeper weight. Freedom was a gift, but it pressed on him like responsibility he did not yet know how to carry. The sea stretched endlessly outside the small window. It looked peaceful, but Aaron knew better. That same water had swallowed hundreds of voices, swallowed the last screams of the men chained beside him. He would never forget them. Later, when he stepped onto the open deck for the first time, the sunlight blinded him. He shielded his eyes and scanned the horizon, half fearing the silhouette of the slave ship appearing again, black and monstrous. But all he saw was the calm, endless blue. Several survivors from the wreck had also been rescued, scattered across the deck, some sitting, some praying, some simply staring into nothing. Every one of them carried the same hollow look, as if death had brushed them, but decided to wait. Aaron felt the ship's timber vibrate beneath his feet. The sensation startled him. Months in chains had conditioned him to expect someone's voice shouting an order immediately after. Instead, a sailor passed by carrying a coil of rope, giving him only a respectful nod. No commands, no shackles, no beatings. The world felt unfamiliar. He touched his wrists instinctively, rubbing the scars where iron had eaten into skin. They were healed but still visible, reminders carved deep like burned-in memories. He wondered if they would ever stop aching. A crewman approached with a cup of water. Aaron hesitated before taking it. Trust was not something that came easily anymore. But he accepted the drink and whispered a quiet, "Thank you." The man simply nodded and moved on. Aaron leaned on the rail of the ship and let the wind wash over him. For the first time, the breeze did not carry the smell of filth and sickness. It carried life. But with that, life came confusion. Where would he go? Who was he now? What future did a man stolen, beaten, and transformed by suffering have? The ocean reflected no answers. Yet Aaron could feel something shifting inside him. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like the first spark under wet wood. But it was there nonetheless, a will to rise again, a will to reclaim what the slave ship had tried to erase. He remembered the men who had died beside him. He remembered Caro, whose final breath had been a whisper of home. He remembered Malik, who had protected him in the early days below deck. He remembered all those who never had the chance to see sunlight again. Their voices now lived inside him, and he would carry them forward. Texto Padras. The ship continued toward land. Aaron began to understand something profound. Freedom was not an ending. It was the beginning of a new struggle, one that demanded strength not of the body, but of the soul. And Aaron, though broken, was not defeated. Not anymore. When the rescue ship finally reached the coast, Aaron stood among the survivors as the shoreline grew larger. The buildings seemed impossibly tall, made of stone rather than the clay and timber he knew. The people moving along the docks walked with confidence, untouched by chains, untouched by fear. This new land felt sharp and unfamiliar, as if it existed in a different world entirely. As the sailors lowered the gangplank, Aaron felt his chest tighten. He had survived the capture, the branding, the ship's belly, the storm, the wreck. But this moment, stepping onto foreign soil, carried a different kind of weight. There were no captors now, no commands, no path laid out for him, only uncertainty. His feet touched the dock. The sound was solid, foreign. People stared at the group of survivors with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Some looked away quickly. Others whispered. Aaron recognized the look. Not hatred, but distance, a need to categorize him as other. Freedom did not guarantee belonging. A local official approached, speaking with the ship's captain, occasionally glancing at the rescued men. Paperwork was exchanged. More whispers, more looks. Aaron tried to make sense of their language, but only fragments reached him. He felt suspended between two worlds, belonging to neither. A missionary group had gathered nearby, offering blankets and small pieces of bread. Aaron accepted them cautiously. Every gesture of kindness still felt like a potential trap. But he needed food. He needed shelter. For now, he accepted what he was given. They led him to a small settlement outside the dockyard, where other survivors were taken. The buildings were simple but clean. There were beds, real beds, not planks or chains. There was water that did not smell of rust or death. Aaron washed himself slowly, watching the dirt and dried blood swirl away. The scars on his body shone raw and pale in the light. After he lay down, he expected nightmares to find him, but instead he remained awake, staring at the wooden beams above him. The silence felt loud. There were no groans of the dying, no footsteps of overseers, no crash of waves threatening to swallow him. Peace had a strange heaviness he had not learned to carry. The next morning, Aaron walked outside the shelter, observing the settlement. Some survivors tried speaking with the workers, practicing new words. Others stared into the ground, unable to push past the memories. A few sobbed quietly, overwhelmed by the realization that freedom came with no map. Aaron was approached by one of the missionaries, a woman with steady eyes and a calm expression. She offered him a small booklet with simple drawings and letters. She gestured that it was meant to teach language. He hesitated, then accepted it. He understood that learning the words of this land would give him power, direction, maybe even dignity. Days turned into weeks. Aaron practiced new sounds carefully, repeating them under his breath. He watched the workers on the docks, trying to understand their routines. He noticed the way free men walked, how they held themselves without fear of sudden blows. He wanted to walk like that. Yet every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of those who had not survived. Their final moments played like echoes that refused to fade. He carried them within him, not as ghosts, but as reminders. If he lived, then he must live with purpose. One evening, Aaron walked to the edge of the settlement where the land met the sea. The horizon burned orange with sunset. The waves moved gently, as if mocking the violence they once unleashed. He inhaled deeply, letting the wind fill his lungs. He realized something important. Freedom was not a destination. It was a discipline, a daily effort to choose life, even when memories begged him to surrender. Aaron made a quiet promise to himself. He would learn the language. He would build a life. He would honor the dead by refusing to remain broken. The road ahead was long and full of unknowns, but for the first time, the unknown did not terrify him. It called to him. Years passed. Not quickly, not gently. Freedom had not erased what happened. It had simply given Aaron the space to confront it. He learned the language of the new land one sound at a time, shaping unfamiliar syllables until they finally obeyed him. He worked at the docks, carrying crates and coiling ropes, slowly rebuilding his strength. Every sunrise found him standing before the sea, reminding himself that he had once survived its worst fury. But the greatest transformation did not happen in his muscles or his speech. It happened in the quiet places of his mind. Over time, he found others like him, men stolen from their homes, women who had escaped plantations, children born in bondage who had never seen the land of their ancestors. They gathered at night in a small clearing beyond the settlement, sitting in a circle lit only by fire. Some prayed, some sang softly. Others simply listened. Aaron listened too. And in their stories, he found pieces of himself. One evening, when the fire crackled low and the waves murmured in the distance, the group fell silent. The elder woman who often led the gatherings looked at Aaron. Her eyes were calm, steady, almost knowing. She asked him to speak. Aaron froze, words caught in his throat. His past had always been something he survived, never something he voiced. But as he looked at the circle of faces waiting for him, he understood something profound. Survival alone was not enough. To heal, he needed to speak. To honor the dead, he needed to remember out loud. To reclaim himself, he needed to become the storyteller of his own life. Aaron inhaled deeply, and then, for the first time, he spoke his truth. He told them about the night he was taken. He told them about the darkness under the deck, the sickness, the suffocation. He told them about the lashes, the chains, the women forced to endure the unspeakable. He told them about the storm that tore the world apart, the moment hope seemed impossible, the final rush of light as the ship split open. He told them about the survivors floating among the wreckage, clinging to life with the desperation of those who refused to die nameless. No one interrupted him. No one looked away. The fire popped and hissed, as if reacting to each word. When he finally fell silent, Aaron felt something shift inside him. Not a release of pain. Pain did not disappear, but its weight had changed. It no longer crushed him. It simply existed, part of him, but not all of him. That night marked a turning. Word spread about the man who survived the ship, the man who spoke with clarity and strength, the man whose memories carried the truth so many tried to forget. People from nearby settlements began coming to hear him. Some cried silently, some clenched their fists in anger, others whispered prayers for the dead. Aaron understood that what he had endured was bigger than him. His story was not only his own, it was a testimony. He began speaking regularly, teaching others about the journey across the ocean, about the cruelty of chains, about the resilience of those who lived, and the dignity of those who did not. His voice grew firm. His steps grew sure. He no longer stood small before the world. The boy who had once been dragged in chains became a man who commanded the silence of crowds. One day, after a long gathering, a young boy approached him. The child's eyes were wide, hopeful. He said that hearing Aaron speak made him believe he could choose a different life from the one others expected him to live. Aaron felt his chest tighten. Not with fear, but with a quiet sense of victory. If even one child could see a future because he had survived his past, then every moment of pain had meaning. As the years continued, Aaron built a small home near the coastline, not close enough for the waves to threaten him, but close enough for him to hear them. He planted fruit trees, he carved tools, he taught children to read and write. He lived not in the shadow of what had been done to him, but in the light of what he chose to build. On the final morning of his life, Aaron woke before sunrise. He stepped outside and watched the horizon glow. The breeze was soft, the air was warm, the sea whispered calmly as if acknowledging him. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He was no longer a captive, no longer a survivor clinging to wreckage. He was a man who had reclaimed his voice, shaped his own destiny, and turned suffering into legacy. The sun rose slowly, washing the world in gold. Aaron stood tall in its light, at peace with every chapter of the story he had lived. His journey had begun in chains, but it ended in freedom, and his voice, carried by those who heard him, would continue long after the waves erased his footprints from the sand. If you enjoyed the story, subscribe to the channel, like and share.